The moment that split my childhood in two did not involve yelling. It did not involve a belt, or a locked door, or anything that would leave a mark anyone could photograph. It was a single sentence. I was 9 years old. I had just run to my newborn baby sister's cradle, arms already open, heart absolutely full, the way only a 9-year-old who has been waiting 3 weeks to hold a baby can feel. And my mother stepped in front of me, wrapped her hand around my wrist, and said in a voice so calm it almost sounded kind, "You are not allowed to touch her." I stood there. I did not cry. Stood there with my arms still half raised like something had been removed from them mid-air. And the worst part, the part that stayed with me for the next 8 years, was that she never told me why. Welcome to this channel. If you are new here, this is where I tell the truth about growing up Old Order Amish, and what it actually cost to leave. Stay with me today, because this story is one I have spent years trying to find the right words for. Subscribe if you want more, and let's go. To understand what my mother did, you need to understand something about Amish discipline that does not make it into the documentaries or the tourism brochures. The most powerful punishment in a plain community is not physical, it is relational. It is the withdrawal of belonging. It is being made, quietly and completely, into someone who does not quite fit inside the circle of the family. No announcement, no explanation, just a slow, consistent pressure that teaches you through repetition that your place is slightly outside. That is what was done to me, and it was done so quietly that it took me years to even recognize it as a punishment at all. For a long time I thought it was just the way things were, that I was simply the kind of child who did not get to hold the baby, who did not get to braid hair or share a bed during storms or carry a little brother on her back the way the other older children did. I thought I was the kind of child who had something in her that needed to be kept at arm's length from the softer, more vulnerable ones. I just did not know what that something was. The rules were never spoken. That is the detail I need you to hold on to, because it is the thing that made this so disorienting for so long. There was no list, no conversation, no moment where my mother sat me down and explained the terms. The rules existed entirely in her actions. I would move toward my sister, and she would redirect me. I would reach for my youngest brother's hand during a walk, and she would take his other hand and steer him away. I would try to comfort a crying sibling, and she would appear, take the child and turn her back, every time, smooth, efficient, like she had been practicing it. I learned the shape of the rule, the way you learn the edges of a piece of furniture in a dark room, by running into it, over and over, until you stop walking in that direction entirely. Here is the specific memory that I cannot shake. My youngest sister was about 2. She fell off the porch steps and split her knee open, and she was screaming that full-body scream that toddlers do when the pain is real, and they do not have words for it yet. I was closest. I ran to her before anyone moved. I picked her up and pressed my cheek against her head and said the words. The low, rocking words. "You are all right. I have you. It is all right." And for maybe 40 seconds it worked. She was already quieting, her little fists were unclenching. And then my mother was there. She did not say a word. She simply lifted my sister out of my arms the way you lift something off a shelf, turned and walked inside. And I stood on that porch with the skin of my arms still warm from where my sister had been, listening to the crying start again from inside the house. And I felt something I could not name at 9 years old but can name now. I felt like evidence of something. Like proof of a thing I did not understand but that everyone around me had already decided about me. Now here is the question I carried for years. Why me? Because it was only me. My older brother was clumsy and rough and nobody pulled toddlers out of his arms. The younger children were not managed away from each other. It was a rule that had exactly one subject. And children are extraordinarily sensitive to asymmetry. I knew the rule was mine alone long before I knew anything else about it. And I want to ask you something because I genuinely want to know. Have you ever been treated differently from your siblings growing up, with no explanation given, and just had to carry that without understanding it? Drop it in the comments. Because what I heard from people after I first mentioned this briefly in a previous video surprised me. A lot of you have been there in your own way. The answer came in pieces. It did not arrive cleanly or all at once. The first piece came when I was around 11. I was in the back room supposed to be folding laundry when I heard my mother and my Aunt Ruth talking in the kitchen, not quietly enough. My aunt said a name I did not recognize, a woman's name, and she said she always reminded me of her, even as a baby, you can see it. And my mother said something I could not fully hear, and then said clearly, I will not make the same mistake twice with this family. I did not know what to do with that then. I filed it away the way children file away the things adults say that they are not supposed to hear. But I did not forget it. The second piece came when I was 13. There was a woman in our district, older, who had been a neighbor to my mother when they were both young and newly married. Her name was Hannah, and she had a reputation in the community that was discussed in the way certain things are discussed in plain communities, obliquely, in references that circle the actual thing without ever landing on it. What I understood was that Hannah's daughter, a girl a few years older than my mother, had at some point left the community, and that her leaving had been treated as a kind of spiritual event, a contamination that spread, because when she left, 2 other young women from the district went with her, and one of them was someone from my father's side of the family. I did not know her name then. I found out later she was my father's cousin. She had left before I was born and was never spoken of directly, but she existed in the atmosphere of our family, the way a storm that happened 20 years ago exists in the memory of a house. You could feel where it had hit. The third piece came when I was 15, and this one I can tell you almost word for word because I read it more than once before I understood what I was holding. My mother had been ill for 2 days, feverish and in bed, and she had asked me to go into her closet and bring down the spare quilt from the shelf above the hanging clothes. It was folded on top of a box, and when I lifted it the box came with it and tipped, and the contents spilled across the closet floor. Papers, a few photographs, a small bundle of letters held together with a piece of cord. I stacked everything back. I was not searching, I want to be honest about that. But one of the letters had come loose from the bundle when it fell, and it was not sealed, and my name was in the first line, so I read it. It was from my Aunt Ruth, written about 2 years before I found it, and in it she said, and I am going to give you the substance of this, as close to exact as I can remember, because I have turned it over in my mind hundreds of times since. She said that she worried my mother was handling me with too much distance. She said that I was a good-natured girl, and that she understood the concern but that a child could not be held responsible for who she resembled. And then she wrote, and this is the line that cut through everything, Naomi, the girl is not her. Whatever you are afraid she carries, she did not choose to carry it. She does not even know it is there. Naomi is my mother's name. So here is what I understood, slowly over the next 2 years, as I turned those pieces over and kept adding to them. My mother looked at me and saw a girl who resembled in some combination of appearance and temperament and curiosity, the cousin who had left. The woman who had walked out of the plain life and, in my mother's understanding of events, had taken others with her by the pull of her closeness, her warmth, her ability to make people feel bonded to her. And my mother had decided, at some point before I was even old enough to be a threat, that she would not allow that kind of closeness to form between me and my younger siblings, that if I had the same pull, the same warmth, the same dangerous affection, she would manage it before it had a chance to work. She was not cruel in her own mind. I have had to sit with that for a long time, and it remains one of the harder things I have had to accept. She genuinely believed she was protecting her other children, not from me as a person, but from what she believed I might, without even meaning to lead them toward. She was operating inside a theology that treated influence as a form of contagion, and she was acting on fear that had been building for more than a decade before I was old enough to understand any of it. But here is what I also know. She was wrong, and the wrongness was not in her caution, it was in her silence. Because a child can survive being told difficult things, what a child cannot survive cleanly is being treated as a problem that is never named. I spent years internalizing a conclusion I was never given the data to question. I am dangerous. My love is a risk. My warmth is something to be managed. And I built my personality around those conclusions before I had any way to examine whether they were true. And I need you to understand what that kind of shaping actually does to a person, because this is where it gets specific and real. It does not just make you sad. It rewires the impulse toward connection itself. I reached adulthood genuinely uncertain whether my affection was safe to offer anyone. Not in a dramatic way. In a quiet, constant, exhausting way. I would feel the pull toward warmth and immediately behind it feel the old reflex, the one that said, wait, check first. Is this allowed? Is this going to cost something? Even outside the community, long after I had left, I would apologize for hugging people. I would preemptively create distance in friendships, because it felt safer than being the person whose closeness caused harm. I carried the architecture of my mother's fear inside me, without her there to enforce it, because that is what happens when you internalize a rule young enough. It does not need an enforcer anymore. It runs on its own. The undoing of that has been the work of years. Actual therapeutic work with an actual therapist who had to very patiently help me trace the belief back to its origin, hold it up to light, and examine whether it was mine or whether it had been placed on me. There is no faster way through that. I wish I could tell you there was. You have to go through it at the pace your nervous system can tolerate. What I want to tell you though is that it moves. It actually moves. There came a day, about 3 years after leaving, when a friend grabbed my hand while we were walking, and I did not calculate anything. I just felt her hand in mine, and it was warm and it was fine, and nothing bad happened, and I was not managing anyone toward a dangerous exit from their life. I was just a person whose friend was holding her hand. And that sounds like almost nothing, but for me it was an arrival I had not been sure was possible. Here is the last thing I want to tell you, and then I have a question for you at the end. My youngest sister, the one from the porch, tracked me down when she was 17. Not through our mother, through a cousin who had my contact information and passed it along quietly. She called me on a phone she had borrowed from a friend, and the first thing she said was not hello. The first thing she said was, "I always felt like I missed something with you. Like there was supposed to be more of you in my life, and I could not figure out where it went." She did not know any of the history then. She had not read the letter. She did not know about the rules, or the strategy, or any of it. She just felt the shape of the absence, the way you feel a missing tooth, and she had been feeling it long enough that she called a sister she barely knew to say so. We talk regularly now. We are doing the slow, clumsy, uncertain work of building a relationship that was sabotaged before either of us were old enough to consent to the sabotage. It is not seamless. We do not have the shorthand of a shared childhood. We sometimes do not know how to be sisters because we were not allowed to practice. But we are practicing now, and every conversation is a small refusal to let the silence be the end of the story. The silent punishment was designed to be permanent. I think my mother believed that if she managed the closeness carefully enough for long enough, it would eventually just become the shape of things, normal, unquestioned, and from inside, for a very long time it was. But it was not permanent. Because silence, it turns out, is not actually stronger than the thing it is trying to suppress. It just makes the reunion louder when it finally comes. Before you go, I want to ask you one thing, not about my story, about yours. What is something you were told, directly or through the shape of how you were treated, that you believed about yourself for years before you found out it was not true? Not a small thing, the real thing, the one that shaped how you moved through the world before you started questioning it. Put it in the comments if you are willing. I read them and I respond when I can, and I promise you nothing you write there is going to surprise me. If this video found you at the right moment, share it, and if you are not subscribed yet, stay. There is more of this story and I am not done telling it. I will see you in the next one.